Hello, my name is Paul Grosswald. I'm a former member of the Church of Scientology, and I have been asked to introduce our next speaker. Now, there are many different ways for people to get involved in the cult awareness movement. Typically, somebody's a former member of a group, and then they come out of the group and they become involved in the cult awareness movement. Or perhaps somebody may have a loved one who's in a cult group, and in the process of trying to get the person out of the group, they become involved in the cult awareness movement. But our next speaker is neither of those. The way in which he became involved in this effort is somewhat unique, and he's going to tell you about it. His name is Bob Minton, and he was an investment banker, and he retired at an early age to spend more time with his family. And in his spare time, he enjoys surfing the internet. It was while traveling the information superhighway that Bob Minton came across an accident. Good Samaritan that he is, he pulled over to the side of the road and got out to help the victims. But this was no ordinary accident. In this case, the accident was the Church of Scientology, and the victims that he was helping were Scientology's critics. What happened next only goes to prove that no good deed goes unpunished. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you a man who Scientologists would probably refer to as a suppressive person, but who I refer to as a hero and a friend. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Bob Minton.
Thank you, Paul. It's truly a great honor to have been invited to speak here at the Cult Information Service Conference. First, a word about Paul. I first met Paul in March of 1996 down in Clearwater, Florida, at which time he gave a speech to a press conference following some demonstrations, picketing that we did down there against the Church of Scientology. And I couldn't believe this young man and how articulate he was and how loving his family was when they tried to get him out of Scientology and the help that they gave to him. And so I was most impressed with his story, and he was a great inspiration for me. Otherwise, there's no way in the world I'd be standing up here today. I won't be able to keep my secrets from you much longer on this point, but I'm neither a public speaker, nor do I possess any formal training on the subject of cults. However, over the last 3 years, and particularly over the course of the last 9 months, I have received a rather fiery baptism on cults and free speech from an organization that Cynthia Kisser said about is quite likely the most ruthless, the most classically terroristic, the most litigious, and the most lucrative cult the country has ever seen. No cult extracts more money from its members. Yes, as Paul mentioned, I am involved in a controversy with the Church of Scientology over what I consider to be one of the most fundamental rights in a democracy, that is, the right to speak freely. Scientology hypocritically cries that theirs is a persecuted religion attacked by bigoted and intolerant critics. Further, Scientology's mantra, repeated ad nauseum throughout their paranoid and delusional history, continues to be that those individuals and governments who dare criticize their antisocial goals, tactics, and civil rights abuses of their members are engaged in some grand conspiracy to destroy the Church of Scientology. Nothing could be further from the truth. I am just one of many people working actively through the internet, the Cult Information Service, FactNet, the American Family Foundation, and in our own individual ways to force much-needed reform on Scientology. These reforms must acknowledge that all of us, particularly Scientologists, have an inalienable right to criticize, oppose, or scrutinize practices that we view as contrary to the respect and dignity required towards our fellow man. Without these most basic rights, there certainly cannot be religious freedom, or in fact any freedom in our democracy. Scientology's own creed, which uses the phrase inalienable rights 7 times, states in part, that all men have inalienable rights to think freely, to talk freely, to write freely their opinions, and to counter or utter or write upon the opinions of others. These are extremely noble words that the Scientology creed holds. But this is truly an organization whose so-called leaders have no shame whatsoever. When will the hypocrisy of the Church of Scientology ever end? In the United States, many of us take our inalienable rights for granted, because by definition they cannot be taken away. But ask your own sons and daughters who have experienced Scientology's orgy of thought reform, or Paulette Cooper from New York, or Larry Wallersheim from Colorado, Stacey Young from Washington, Arnie Lerma from Virginia, or Frank Oliver from Florida. If their inalienable rights were in any way protected while in Scientology, or if Scientology, once these people left, in any way respected those rights once they departed. Ask Lisa McPherson and Noah Loddick if their right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness was in any way sacred to the Church of Scientology. A little known fact in our society is that we have no rights under our Constitution unless we are willing to stand up and affirmatively assert them. This is a price all cults and litigious entities like Scientology force us to pay in our society, because they are so willing to strip their members and critics alike of as many rights as we will cede to them. Let me tell you a little bit about personal boundaries and how an organization like Scientology tries to prey and destroy on personal boundaries of family members, friends, associates, and yes, even children, to stop the truth from being told about this organization. Before detailing Scientology's campaign of harassment and intimidation against me personally, I want to share some thoughts with you that I had in August of 1997, when I actually began to doubt some of the stories which I'd heard from critics about the incredible levels of harassment and intimidation inflicted on people by the Church of Scientology. By this time, I had given a lot of financial support to a number of critics, and some of this was clearly public knowledge. Yet I hadn't been subjected to any sort of criticism or any harassment, no threatening phone calls, nothing. I began to wonder if the people in the Church of Scientology were really as bad as these stories that I had heard from critics. I began to doubt whether critics were telling the truth, or maybe exaggerating somewhat about their experiences at the hands of Scientology. But that was only the calm before the storm. And now the veracity of the critics' stories rings clearly true for me. There is a Scientology directive called, quote, Critics of Scientology, unquote, written by Ron Hubbard in 1967, which has taken on particular meaning for me over the last few months. This is in part what it says. We are slowly and carefully teaching the unholy a lesson. It is as follows. We are not a law enforcement agency, but we will become interested in the crimes of people who seek to stop us. If you oppose Scientology, we promptly look up and find and expose your crimes. If you leave us alone, we will leave you alone. It's very simple. Even a fool can grasp that. And don't underrate our ability to carry it out, unquote. I can tell you from firsthand experience that you should not in any way underrate the amount of money Scientology is willing to spend on private investigators to try to dig up or make up some sort of criminal past on someone they are trying to stop, as they are trying to stop me and many others. The intimidation began in September 1997 when I was contacted by Elliott Abelson, a former mafia attorney who now works for Scientology. Gambino crime family, my porn cases in New York. Abelson said he was aware that I was funding Larry Wallersheim, who many of you know, and Ken Dandar, the attorney for the Lisa McPherson estate. It was not the case at the time Abelson said this with Ken Dandar, but now I thank Abelson for giving me that idea, because I have since indeed assisted Lisa McPherson's estate. During the course of our conversation, Abelson warned me that my family's stability and my financial stability were at risk because I was attacking Scientology. I suppose during the course of our discussion, I made it clear to him that I did not intend to capitulate. Within 2 weeks of that phone call, I received a call from extremely distant relatives in Tennessee who told me that Scientologists were there. These were Scientologists, not Scientology detectives, but actual Scientologists, who were doing a background check on me, going through all the public records that were available in my hometown of Nashville, Tennessee, where I last lived over 30 years ago. In November, I got a call from a woman at the Scientology org in Boston, whose name was Mary Frances Newman. In a subtle but firm way, she said that if I did not stop giving financial support to critics of Scientology, the church would attack me on 5 fronts: family, children, ex-wives, former business partners, and my federal and state tax status. The last one, given their current arrangements with the IRS, maybe they do have that authority now, I'm not sure. The morning after that phone call from Mary Frances Newey was the first time, but not the only time, that my children, who are 10 and 12 years old, were followed from our front door half a block down the street to our neighbor's house for carpool in the morning. This was not an attempt by Scientology to intimidate my children. This was an attempt by Scientology to intimidate me and my wife, because we dearly love our children. Later, this very same woman who had told me about these 5 points of attack that would take place signed a declaration witnessed by one of her colleagues named Kevin Hall, swearing that she never said any of these things to me. But when you hear what I have to say here today, you will know that they have done exactly what she promised. My hand's not shaking as much now, so I can drink. Soon after that call, I received the following letter from Elliot Abelson, the ex-mafia attorney now working for Scientology, who incidentally in California was overheard in the lobby of a courthouse saying that he could try a pornography case in his sleep. He's done it so many times. But he was there on a copyright infringement case at the time, though. Dear Mr. Minton, you appear to have undertaken the financial maintenance of a significant number of litigants adverse to Scientology churches in the United States. You have even become the patron of dog and pony show witnesses without legal claims, like the Youngs, who instigate disputes and sell their testimony to the litigants you underwrite. You're now even financing the travel of hate-filled individuals, some of whom have already been prohibited by courts from committing further acts of violence against members of the Churches of Scientology, from across the United States to the Church of Scientology's premises in Clearwater, Florida. You are in this manner a responsible party in fostering a climate of hatred in Clearwater, which endangers our staff and parishioners who work and live there. The distraction to church ministers and parishioners engaged in religious services by the potential hate crimes committed by individuals you are financing would not be occurring were it not for you going out of your way to foment their irrational hatred. If you have not realized it before, then recognize now that this creates a serious potential liability for you. A number of those with whom you have associated yourself through your patronage, such as Dennis Ehrlich and Keith Hinson, have engaged in threats and acts of violence, attempts at intimidation and scandal-mongering. Association with lawbreakers such as these, combined with the monetary demands that inevitably accompany their involvement in litigation or similar fertile areas for attempts of extortion, make your actions of interest to the prosecutors to whom such conduct has been referred. My client holds you, your associates and backers, financial or otherwise, personally responsible for any and all damages it has suffered or will continue to suffer as a result of your tortious, officious intermeddling in church affairs. The church will not tolerate such conduct. I demand that you immediately withdraw all financial support for such matters, and am warning you that you and those you are financing have crossed the threshold of legality. I advise you to inform me forthwith what you have done to cease fomenting and financing unlawful attacks against my client. None of which I have done. As I have done during every step of the process in my dealings with the Church of Scientology, I detailed this harassing letter from Elliot Abelson by posting it to the internet to keep everyone abreast so that everyone could see the types of intimidation tactics used by this organization. It was also at about this time I decided it was time to get some very competent legal counsel in Boston, which I did. And good thing, too, because in late November, Scientology subpoenaed me to be deposed in the Lisa McPherson case in Clearwater, Florida. They told the judge with a straight face that I was an agent of the German government funneling money into the United States to destroy the Church of Scientology. They told this same story to the New York Times. And in the first communication I ever received from the New York Times, this was what they wanted to come and talk to me about. The Church of Scientology has said you are an agent of the German government funneling money into the United States. In the McPherson case, what they told the judge was that I was trying to substitute my agenda, which they perceived as putting the entire Church of Scientology on trial in the McPherson case, when in fact, Scientology was trying to divert attention from the real issue, the tragic death of Lisa McPherson. The judge eventually allowed them to depose me in this case in order to discover my motives, because they made a very big point that my motives were sinister, global conspiracy type stuff, and he eventually allowed them to do a very limited deposition. Scientology flew 3 of their high-priced attorneys from Florida. The lead guy, who was the ex-district attorney for the Southern District of New York, heading this case for the Florida law firm working for the church. 2 Boston, 1 paralegal from the Office of Special Affairs, the internal security agency of Scientology, and Earl Cooley as their local counsel in Boston. Of course, he didn't have to travel far. Cooley, as you know, as many of you know, is now the chairman of the Board of Trustees of Boston University, a longtime Scientologist and a fierce defender of Scientology's rights to abuse, harass, and intimidate critics. In addition to a number of questions relevant to the funding of the Lisa McPherson litigation, they also tried to use the opportunity, as they always do in depositions, for intelligence gathering. But I simply refused to answer any such questions, which I knew would simply be turned over to their private investigators to facilitate their investigations. In December of '97, I went down to Clearwater to picket in front of the Fort Harrison Hotel, now the spiritual headquarters of the Church of Scientology, with 30 other internet activists on the 2nd anniversary of Lisa McPherson's death. While we picketed in Clearwater, Scientology did their first picket of my home in Boston. The picketing of my house in Boston continued for the next 2.5 months, and about every 2 or 3 days there would either be a picket or somebody from the Church of Scientology handing out leaflets in the neighborhood describing my actions as a hate monger, a KKK-style leader of rallies throughout the United States, and a few other things, particularly that I was mean to my mother because I charged her interest on a loan. The picket in Clearwater that occurred in December was a very significant event because the Church of Scientology, in total disregard for their founders' written policies, closed their most sacred place, the Fort Harrison Hotel. Members of the paramilitary wing of Scientology, the C organization, were not allowed to even wear their uniforms in Clearwater. Out of fear, they said, of being attacked by this band of vicious critics that have been flown in by me to foment all this hate and torment for the church in Clearwater. So, what did Scientology do instead? Instead of confronting the picketers in any way, this small band of peaceful picketers, 4,000 Sea Org members picketed the Clearwater Police and the St. Petersburg Times and damaged their Scientology's own standing in the community even further. The December 1997 picket in Clearwater was an incredible moral victory for many ex-Scientologists, a turning point many of us see in the battle with this organization. Scientology was so afraid of exposing its members to anyone questioning the tactics and policies that they seemingly have since felt compelled to literally hide when anyone shows up for a picket, whether it's one person or 50. While I was in Clearwater in February to film an interview with a German TV station, I met with Gabe Cazares, the former mayor, who many of you have heard his story, who was mercilessly harassed by Scientology because of his criticism of them when they first came to town. He told me that before that December picket, he personally was all but ready to give up on ever having the opportunity to control Scientology's influence in Clearwater because they had so integrated themselves into the community and were basically being more widely accepted. However, Scientology's reactions to our picket, in terms of lashing out at the community, created such animosity among the citizenry that it literally has set back, according to the newspaper reports you can read in Florida, Scientology's public relations efforts in Clearwater by 20 years. In March, I flew to LA for a picket to celebrate L. Ron Hubbard's birthday, which is usually a big event for Scientology. In all, there were 50 picketers who came from all over the world to defy this organization, which is so consumed with its own self-importance and so intent upon silencing its critics. Obviously, Scientology is not able to confront a handful of peaceful picketers protesting an organization that has devastated so many people's lives. They chose instead, while we picketed, to put tarps up in front of one of their buildings, blue tarps that you would collect your leaves in the fall and things like this, to hide the staff from this small group of picketers marching back and forth on Hollywood Boulevard in front of their building. They actually canceled the birthday party event on L. Ron Hubbard Way, the street they had the city of Los Angeles rename for their beloved founder. They actually canceled the event because the whole street had been taken over by this small band of picketers. When we first went there to L. Ron Hubbard Way, we were told the street is closed. We have a permit from the city. I asked, can we see this permit? The permit said that the street was closed. It didn't say anything about the sidewalks. I said, we're only interested in the sidewalks. So the police were called. They delayed us for a while, but the police were called, and eventually we were able to exercise our rights to free speech and picket on the sidewalks in front of their buildings. That was too much for them. Everybody who was there were taken inside. Before the police actually came, I had the opportunity to sit down and talk with a senior Scientologist who had been in Los Angeles for many, many years, who was married and had a child. But in the Sea Org, when you have a child, you can't stay there in Los Angeles. You need to get out. They sent her to the hinterlands in America. But she assured me that she was perfectly capable of talking to me or anyone else anytime she wanted to, because that's, after all, one of the things that Scientology's creed allows. And we talked. But after about 5 minutes of discussing my impression of her freedoms to speak and freedoms to associate, she being basically the last Scientologist outside at this stage, was told by a security guard that she could no longer talk to me and had to go in. I think this was a real demonstration of how Scientology's creed works. A much smaller group of picketers went to Hemet, the home of Scientology's fearless leader, David Miscavige. We saw nothing but security guards at the gate, security cameras everywhere on the fence surrounding the property, and people literally hiding behind closed windows and curtains, peeping out to see what this group of people were doing out there that the church had required them to stay inside for. Not one person ever came out to confront us. Hemet looked like the Fort Harrison Hotel did in December, completely deserted. I was not the first picketer to arrive, but the first picketer. When he arrived, there were people on the golf course. They have a beautiful golf course there. There were people moving between the buildings. That's when they all had to go in. When the first picketer, the single picketer, first arrived. This is an organization that clearly cowers at the truth. Scientology claims to be able to create supernatural powers and enable people to confront any situation except for one: the truth about Scientology. Perhaps Jesus had an explanation for this anomaly that can be found in John chapter 3, verse 20 to 21, when he warned, "For everyone that doeth evil hateth the light, neither cometh to the light, lest his deeds should be reproved, exposed, and rebuked. But he that doeth truth cometh to the light, that his deeds may be made manifest, and that they are wrought in God." Proving that I was not afraid to shed light on the story I wanted to tell. December started with articles in the St Petersburg Times, the Boston Globe, the Chicago Tribune, and the New York Times. As these articles came out, I think I became far more threatening to Scientology, because mainstream media were looking more closely at an organization that wants absolutely no scrutiny. This seemed to heighten Scientology's disdain for me and only intensified the picketing and flyers. I've got to speed up a little bit, I'm told so. In the week prior to the McPherson deposition, Scientology hired private detectives to visit my family members, my son, my mother, my brothers, my father, stepmother, aunts, uncles, and untold others. In December, I was also on a WGBH show in Boston, Greater Boston, with Emily Rooney. And when Scientology went to see my family members, they took a copy of this videotape with them and used this tape as a ploy to sit down and show their family member on TV. They bought it. All of my family, no matter what I had done to prepare them, allowed these detectives working for the Church of Scientology to come in and spend, for example, with my mother, 3 hours I was angry about the visits to my family. It was extraordinarily hurtful. The fact that in such a short period of time while these detectives stayed in Tennessee, some of my own flesh and blood could so question my dedication to them as a family member. It was like having been violated by these detectives when they went into the homes and businesses of my family members, simply to antagonize me, to gather intelligence for their investigation, and to further illustrate their willingness to harass and intimidate someone who was prepared to help people stand up against them. This is where I first felt what I can only describe to you as a cold steel ball of fear in my stomach. Scientology even authorized someone to pass out scurrilous leaflets about me in St. Bart's in the French West Indies last month while I was vacationing there with my wife and daughters. This leaflet, which as you can see the headline on, and you probably can't read much else, and it's a gift copy of the original flyer. It says, "Facts about Robert S. Minton." I won't read it now, but I will leave it up here if anybody would like to see it. In the interest of time, I won't read it now, and I would be happy to answer at a later time today any questions about that. This particular leaflet was far more scurrilous than the ones they were able to pass out on Beacon Hill in Boston, because those they had to sign after they were criticized so much for the first leaflet they handed out, which they did not sign, and many other leaflets they just passed out under cover of darkness. In January of this year, I was served with 2 more subpoenas for depositions in other cases, one in a bankruptcy case in California where I'd given financial support to Grady Ward, an internet critic who was totally unjustifiably attacked by the Church of Scientology, and the other involving a temporary restraining order against another internet critic, Keith Henson, who had been roughed up by a Scientology detective in Los Angeles. More national media began broadcasting or filming in January. NBC's Dateline, CBS's Public Eye, which we all enjoyed, ABC's Turning Point is doing a story now, and a major German television station all have or plan to air major exposés about Scientology. In fact, the German show is airing tonight on German TV throughout the country, and an article based on that show was published yesterday in a German newspaper and beamed all over the world last night on the internet. When these media talk to Scientology spokespeople about me, an interesting thing develops. Scientology pretends that I am nothing to them, that I am not important, and they try to get the media to lose interest in me. Yet in Clearwater, when Scientology's public relations man, Brian Anderson, saw the German TV crew filming me in front of the Fort Harrison Hotel, he canceled all of the appointments that the German TV crew had made with the Church of Scientology and their attorneys in the Lisa McPherson case. And the reason he did it is he said, "You did not tell us when we met that you were going to be interviewing Bob Minton for this story." So, in order to punish him, they sent him back to his base in Washington, and subsequently, a week later, allowed him to come back and do the interview finally. In late January, following this New York Times article back in December, I was asked to meet with Professor Abdul Fattah Amour, who is the person at the United Nations who is responsible for putting together the United Nations annual reports on human rights and religious intolerance. He came to the United States for several days, 2 of which were in New York, and I was fortunately asked to sit down and spend a couple of hours with him in private and to present, at his request, another side of the Scientology issue for this man who is interested in religious intolerance throughout the world. And his report was, in fact, finalized late March and delivered to the UN in Geneva in early April. And I'll just quote one item that was mentioned in the New York Times on April the 2nd about this. This comparison between modern Germany and Nazi Germany is so shocking as to be meaningless and puerile, the investigator Abdul Fattah Amor said in issuing his report. The report counters criticism made by Scientologists and by the United States State Department in its annual human rights report criticizing Germany. In the meantime, the private investigators now working for Scientology have tracked down more of my business associates all over the world. In Turkey, in England, in Brazil, and other countries. They have dug up business associates of my wife's family and the families of my former business associates even. People who have refused to meet with the detectives working for the Church of Scientology who want to tell them how evil and horrible I am are themselves subject to investigations. They go to their apartments, to their places of their homes, and get on their neighbors. This guy is the evil guy. He has an evil friend, Bob Minton. So this is how they put pressure on people. And it's terrible because it works. Social pressure works, and these Scientologist detectives are extremely good at this. I want to tell you some of the things, though, that they have said in the process of violating the types of boundaries, personal boundaries, that the Church of Scientology loves to violate. First, the Scientology private investigators show my friends or business associates a detailed psychological evaluation of me and say they are convinced that I'm so mentally unstable that I am likely at any moment to run into a Scientology church and shoot 20 to 30 Scientologists. This is how they start the conversation. It goes downhill from there. This is the nicest thing they said about me. Every detail of my life, everything negative, everything they can distort or paint in any bad light whatsoever, this is what they tell my friends and associates, so people will feel uncomfortable with me. And then I will in turn feel that discomfort, and eventually Scientology hopes I won't want to put everyone in my life through this kind of hassle and will back off of their case. But every time they go after one of my friends or associates, it increases my resolve. It's like, I'm afraid for them, it's like waving a red flag in front of a bull. The tactics they use against me and others who criticize them are wrong. I'm just one in a long line of people they have been doing this to since they have existed. Ron Hubbard even did this to his own wife and children. These tactics and policies are wrong and must be changed by the Church of Scientology. My experience, coupled with my friends' reactions to these detectives' visits, has made more understandable to me what happened in Nazi Germany and how that could have occurred. People laughed at the Nazis at first. Then they were scared and intimidated into total, utter silence. And then there was nobody left to fight with them, and they took over. People do not wish to get their families involved in the type of battle that I'm involved in. But it is a threat to all families, not just mine. There's no better audience to understand this than you people sitting here today who have seen the results within your own families of so many destructive cults. Sometimes I very much question, why I'm doing this and whether I should continue to do it, knowing that there's no way that I personally can force Scientology to reform. But I keep doing it because I want other people to get involved, and it must be done. The St Petersburg Times asked in March of '97, can anyone stand up to the Church of Scientology? In response, Frank Rich of the New York Times wrote in an op-ed piece on March 16th, the great American religious saga of the 1990s may be the rise to power of a church that has successfully brought the Internal Revenue Service, the State Department, and much of the American press to heel, even as it did an in-run around the courts. To counter this will require a tremendous amount of work for all of us. We need to help educate the press to see what Scientology is doing and who it is willing to step on to do it. We have to provide support to those who are on the front lines fighting against this organization. We have to be willing to make personal sacrifices, both in terms of time and money, for this cause. Scientology concentrates only on the grand conspiracy because Ron Hubbard and Scientology were products of the McCarthy era and have never moved on. This organization lacks the mental agility or resources to defend against multiple attacks. So they need to be exposed for what they are from as many angles as possible. I have never in any way advocated the destruction of the Church of Scientology, but I am seriously interested in reforming the tactics and policies that abrogate the human and civil rights of its members and critics. If Scientology wants to be treated like a church, it's high time they start to act like one. As for myself, I do not intend to surrender my rights to Scientology without an armed struggle. I will be armed with the stories of abuse and betrayal, harassment, intimidation, fear, broken families, neglected children, financial ruin, and the personal and emotional devastation that so many ex-Scientologists have suffered. The strategic thinkers at the top of Scientology need to understand a fundamental law of physics. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. This postulate is equally true in life. No matter what form the hate that Scientology dishes out takes, no matter what form the hate that Scientology dishes out takes, they will always be on the receiving end of intense and concentrated actions from an ever-growing circle of critics. This is precisely what Scientology has done with me and many others who are now players in this mythological battle between good and evil. As cult apologist J. Gordon Melton said, they turn critics into enemies and enemies into dedicated warriors for a lifetime. Given the current level of harassment, intimidation, and abuse dished out by this organization, my crystal ball sees Scientology's future is filled with more negative consequences in response to their actions, including more press, more media, and more public speaking against Scientology's anti-social policies, abuse of the legal system, and total disregard for the rights of others. More organized and concentrated efforts to educate celebrity victims being used by Scientology and manipulated as to the true nature and origins of the evil and vile practices of this organization. And we will target selected celebrities for personal intervention. More specific efforts to reach individual members with the truth about Scientology's lies and hypocrisy. And more fundraising from an expanding array of talented people and capable people who will no longer tolerate the bullying policies and tactics used by Scientology management. I'm almost finished, don't worry. Standing up to the Church of Scientology has been an incredibly enlightening and enriching personal experience for me. A test of my character, my own personal character at each and every step of the way. And it has not been easy. I've gotten to know many former Scientologists, and clearly they are some of the nicest people I've ever known. While in Scientology, these very same people were taught to lie and betray and acquiesce to having their own rights taken away from them. This proves to me that even an organization as totalitarian as Scientology cannot strip away innate human goodness, and gives me hope that we will get to know many more former Scientologists as our actions continue in the coming weeks and months. Thank you very much.
We have time for a few questions.
If anybody has a few questions they'd like to ask, give it a shot. Over here. Mr. Carmichael, please.
Yes, Reverend Carmichael with the Church of Scientology in New York. For all your claims and so forth, can you explain why you chose to support, of all people, a man who is, for instance, one of them is an associate of Louis Carto, described as the foremost anti-Semite in America, why you support a man who is a wife beater and a deadbeat dad, who is enjoined by injunction to keep him away from the Church of Scientology because of threatened violence against its members, why you support another person who posts notes on the internet so foul that Dateline couldn't publish them, and you certainly couldn't read them from the podium, and so forth. Why do you choose this group of people whose credentials I've just enumerated?
Because you misrepresent reality, because those people are not bad people. They were former top officials.
The question's for him.
I can easily answer that question. Each and every one of those people are human beings just like you and I like them. I'm sorry that Grady Ward uses particularly, or has in the past used particularly foul language on the internet. But that is Grady's style. Grady is an extremely intelligent and articulate person who chooses to use that particular tactic so that the people in Scientology who read his disgusting post will not forget what he is saying. And this is always directed at lawyers working for the Church of Scientology. The rest of the people you've talked about, I think they're extremely kind and wonderful people who needed help, not help that they got from the Church of Scientology. So I hope that answers your question.
Allegations are false.
Yes, plus the allegations are false. And even if they were true, it shouldn't be any of your business what I did.
I'd like to turn the question just around just a little bit. I wonder why the last questionnaire didn't answer the problems about Scientology. Why do they always go after something other than what's wrong with them?
Well, I can give you a very good... explanation based on my own personal experience. I've tried on 2 occasions to arrange meetings with senior people in the Church of Scientology, including David Miscavige, including Mike Rinder, the head of the Office of Special Affairs, together at the particular time with Sylvia Stannard, who is here in our office, and Beth Akiyama, who is the public relations lady for Scientology in New York. They are not able to sit down and meet with me and talk about issues that we feel are relevant. It is not our business to be criticizing the Church of Scientology. It is not allowed under their policies. So how can they sit down and talk with somebody who's doing something that is not allowed under the policies of L. Ron Hubbard?
I think we'd have to cut.
Okay. I think we're out of time.
Okay, just so you know, if anybody had a question and you didn't have time to ask it, I believe most of our keynote speakers, if they can, will be sticking around after the conference. Later on or during lunch, feel free to approach anybody with any questions you have.
Thanks again.